Welcome back, my fellow game developers. As you can see, we've added a player. Actually, it's sort of just a capsule right now, but well, it represents our player. I think he looks cool enough. He looks like a Robocop, but we've added a player, which is a capsule. We've added eyes to our player. We've added a character controller with a player script, and we've learned a lot of things like character controller, a pivot, and parent and child relationship. So let's not waste any more time and let's get started. Okay, so let's start first of all by creating a body for our player. Now, right click in the hierarchy, go ahead to the 3D object and let's go ahead and create a capsule. Let's reset its position, and now we have it on the 0, 0, 0, and let's move it up just a little bit. Now, if the light gizmo and the camera here are a bit bothering you, just like it's bothering me, let's go ahead and reduce the size of them, or we can actually turn them off completely, but we won't do that. In here, in the gizmos, you can actually click on here and you can make them smaller so they don't look as glaring and they don't distract us from our main tasks. Okay, great. So now we have this capsule right here, and let's go ahead and increase the scale around 1.6. Let's make it 1.6, make it a bit bigger, move it up a bit, and this capsule will actually be our players, or let's simply call it the body. Great, so now we have a body that represents sort of our player. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a bit of personality to this capsule right here by creating a eyes. Well, the eyes. Right click in the hierarchy, go to the 3D object and let's go ahead and create a cube. Again, let's reset its position and put it up here. Let's make the eyes, well, actually the eyes should always be smaller, so we'll make like this and scale it down on this axis also and these axes also, and let's move them to the front. Let's go into the materials and add the plain material to our eyes, and let's call this, let's look at that. Yes, looks much cooler now. Let's move these up a bit. So now we have this Robocop. Doesn't he look like Robocop? I think he does. So now let's scale this up a bit on the left and right. Okay, very nice. So now we have the eyes. Let's rename them as the eyes. Okay, great. Now, what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that our body, if we move it, it moves without the eyes, so they are not moving together. How are we going to fix this? Well, we can use something in Unity that is called parent-child relation. So if we move the eyes onto the body, you can see that the eyes become a child of the body. So now when we move the body, the eyes actually move with our body. And let me explain a bit more what all of this means. So what is parent-child relationship? So the child will move, rotate, and scale with the parent game object. It's used for creating a body of objects that move together. So just like your arms are attached to your body when your torso, when your torso moves forward, your arms move with your torso. Now this is a bit of a weird explanation, but you get the point. So child moves, scales, and rotates with the parent. So children can also be parents to other game objects. So we can create children to the eyes that are currently the children of the body. So we can create as much children as we want. And finally, child transform properties are relative to the parent. So what does this mean? So let's go back. So in here you can see that the eyes position is currently 0, 0.612 and 0.46. Well, actually, if we move the body right now, you'd expect that the position of the eyes should change. But if we go back to the eyes, you can see that the position is still 0, 0.6 and 0.4. This means that the child objects, the position and rotation and scale are actually relative to the parent object that we have. Okay, great. So now that that's clear, let's go ahead and create another game object, and this time it's going to be an empty game object, and this is going to be our player. We are going to reset its position. Let's reset the position on the X and the Z of our body right here, and let's put it under the player. So now the player is the parent, the body is a child of the player, and the eyes are the child of the body. So now our player, when the player moves, the body, the eyes move with him. Now, great. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a character controller. Now, before we do that, let's explain what character controller is. So, what is a character controller? It's used to control a first person or a third person character in your game. Now, of course, we are using the first person. We're going to be creating a first person shooter. So we are going to be using it for our first person. It's more realistic than using rigid bodies. Now, a rigid body. Now, we still didn't learn what rigid body is, but later on we are going to be explaining everything about rigid body, and it actually adds physics to a certain body to move through the world, and using character controller is actually much more realistic than using a rigid body. It allows for more fine-tuning. So, for example, we want to jump, move, add velocity. Later on, you'll see that it's much better than using a rigid body. And finally, it doesn't get affected by forces. A rigid body, when added to a game object, makes that game object susceptible to the physics around it. So forces and different things will affect it. We don't want to have that on our player. Despite what you might think, whenever you play a game, it doesn't actually get affected by the forces around it, except for ones that we want to affect the player. So this is the whole point of the character controller. Now let's go back into Unity and let's add a character controller on our player. The way we add a component is we click on the object that we want to add a component to, which is our player. We go to the inspector. We have this add component here, so we click it and we can type in character controller and just add it right here. And as you can see, the character controller is actually under our player, and that's because, let me show you what this means. Because now, if we look back up here, we have the global settings. If we click on the center right here, it becomes pivot. And pivot is actually the center of our current game object, and it's where everything revolves around. This is why the character controller is in the middle of, or actually the player game object is in the center of our character controller, so we'll need to move it up a little bit. So the way we move it up, in here we have the option to move the center. So we'll move this up a bit and we'll increase the height. So let's make the height to fit our capsule, and we can also increase, or actually not too much, we can increase or decrease the radius. Actually, that radius is good enough. And one final thing, go to the body and remove the capsule collider, and go to the eyes and also remove the box collider. So the only thing that we need is the character controller that gives us the ability to interact with the world around us. Okay, great. So now we have this character controller, and as you can see right here, it also has a slope limit. So the slope means the angle at which the character can ride on or move up on. We have the step offset. So what is, for example, let's say we have this step right here. If we decrease it a lot, our player will not be able to step on it. And we also have the height and the radius and the center of our character controller. Now, final thing we want to do is we want to add a script to our player, and it's actually going to be your challenge. So your challenge is going to be to create a player script. So create a folder for the scripts that we are going to be adding, create a C# script and name it player, add it to our player object, and finally open up the script in Visual Studio. So pause the video right now and go ahead and do the challenge. Okay, welcome back. Hope that wasn't too hard of a challenge. We already did this a couple of times, or maybe just one time. So in here, right click, create folder. We'll call this the scripts. Inside of scripts, we are going to right click, create, and create a C# script. Make sure that you call it correctly the first time. So player, yes, hit enter, wait for it to compile. Okay, so now it's ready, and we're simply going to go ahead and attach it to our player. We're going to save that, click on player, and now we have the script attached to it as a component. Double click on player, it will open up in Visual Studio, and everything should be working correctly. Now, before we move on, let me just tell you about something. If your Visual Studio is not working, I saw this problem in a lot of people. So go into the edit, preferences, external tools, and in here make sure that the external script editor is the Visual Studio Community. There are different things that you can use. Maybe you have Studio Visual Code or something, it's called like that, and it will not open up correctly. So make sure that you have Visual Studio Community as your external script editor. Okay, great. So now that we're done with this, in the next video we are going to be adding a bit of character movement to our player. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, before we go, I forgot to do something. Go into the source tree, stage all of our changes, commit them, and we'll call it here, edit my player with a character controller. Commit that, and now we have it in our branches. I'll see you in the next video.